was in Assisi, Italy. I stayed there for a few days and I kind of followed the footsteps of Saint Francis of Assisi. Though he was revered today, he began his life as a confirmed sinner. His father was a very wealthy man, wealthy clothes merchant who owned farmland around Assisi, and Francis was not in want during his youth. He was spoiled, indulging himself with fine food, wine, and wild celebration. By the age 14, he had left school and become known as a rebellious teenager who frequently drank, partied, and broke city laws. He was also known for his charm and vanity. And in these privileged surroundings, Francis of Assisi learned the skills of archery, wrestling, horsemanship. He was expected to follow his father in the family textile businesses, but was bored by the prospect of life in the clothes trade. Instead of planning a future as a merchant, he began daydreaming as a future as a knight. Knights were medieval action heroes, and if Francis had an ambition, it was to be a war hero like them. It wouldn't be long before the opportunity for warfare beckoned. So in 1202, there was a war between Assisi and Perugia, and Francis eagerly took his place with the cavalry. Little did he know at that time, experience with war would change him forever. Francis and the men of Assisi came under heavy attack, and in the face of superior numbers, they took flight. The whole battlefield was soon covered with the bodies of butchered, mutilated men screaming in agony. Most of the surviving Assisi troops were immediately put to death, and Francis, unskilled and with no combat experience, was quickly captured by the enemy soldiers. Dressed like an aristocrat and wearing expensive new armor, he was considered worthy of a decent ransom, and the soldiers decided to spare his life. He and the other wealthy troops were taken as prisoners, led off to a dark underground cell. Francis would spend nearly a year in such a miserable condition, awaiting his father's payment, during which time he may well have contracted a serious disease. Also, during this time, he would later report he began to receive vision from God. So, after a war of negotiation, Francis' ransom was accepted and he was released from prison. When he came to Assisi, however, Francis was a very different man. Upon his return, he was dangerously sick in both mind and body, a battle fatigue casualty of war. One day, as legend has it, while riding on a horse in the local countryside, Francis encountered a leper. Prior to the war, Francis would have run from the leper, but on this occasion, his behavior was very different, viewing the leper as a symbol of moral conscience, or as Jesus incognito. According to some religious scholars, he embraced and kissed him, later describing the experience as a feeling of sweetness in his mouth. After this incident, Francis felt an indescribable freedom. His earlier lifestyle has lost all of its appeal. And subsequently, Francis, now in his early 20s, began turning his focus towards God. Instead of working, he spent an ever increasing amount of time at a remote mountain hideaway as well as in old quiet churches around Assisi, praying for answers and helping nurse lepers. During this time, while praying before an old Byzantine crucifix in the church of San Damiano, Francis reportedly heard the voice of Christ, who told him to rebuild the church, the Christian church, and leave. and to live a life of extreme poverty.
I know
I
this
went
looks like a
to
lot,
this church, the Church of San Damiano.
but not
It's a
if you
beautiful
had the vision of the
small
lights. Ah,
church
yes, yes, yes.
right
These were the
beside
three
the
things that
vineyards in
flew over
Assisi.
smooth on top.
And
So that's why you came down here, isn't that right? The balls of
uh,
fire. Follow the
Francis
balls,
obeyed and
and aim
devoted
softly.
himself to Christianity.
It was great
So he
job,
began
guys.
preaching around Assisi, was soon joined by 12 loyal followers. Some regarded Francis as a madman or a fool, but others viewed him as one of the greatest examples of how to live the Christian ideal since Jesus Christ himself. Whether he was really touched by God or simply a man misinterpreting hallucinations brought on by mental illness and or poor health, Francis of Assisi quickly became well known throughout the Christian world. And after his epiphany at the Church of San Damiano, Francis experienced another defining moment in his life. In order to raise money to rebuild the Christian church, he sold a bolt of cloth from his father's shop along with his horse. His father became furious upon learning of his son's actions and subsequently dragged Francis before the local bishop. The bishop told Francis to return his father's money, to which his reaction was extraordinary. He stripped off his clothes and along with them returned the money back to his father, declaring that God was now the only Father he recognized. And this event is credited as Francis' final conversion, and there is no indication that Francis and his father ever spoke again thereafter. The bishop gave Francis a rough tunic, and dressed in these new humble clothes, Francis left Assisi. And luckily for him, the first people he met on the road were a group of dangerous thieves who beat him badly. Despite his wounds, Francis was elated from now on. He would live according to the gospel. So Francis embraced Christian-like poverty was a radical notion at the time. The Christian church was tremendously rich, much like the people heeding it, which concerned Francis and many others who felt that the long held apostolic ideals had eroded. So Francis sent out on a mission to restore Jesus Christ's own original values to the now decadent church. With his incredible charisma, he drew thousands of followers to him. They listened to his sermons and joined in a way of life. His followers became known as Franciscan friars, continuously pushing himself in a quest for spiritual perfection. Francis was soon preaching in up to 5 villages per day, teaching a new kind of emotional and personal Christian religion that everyday people could understand. He even went so far as to preach to animals, which garnered criticism from some and earned him the nickname God's Fool. But Francis' message was spread far and wide, and thousands of people were captivated by what they heard. In 2024, 1224, Francis reportedly received a vision that left him with the stigmata of Christ, marks resembling the wounds Jesus Christ suffered when he was crucified. Through his hands and the gaping lance wounds in his side, this made Francis the first person to receive the holy wounds of the stigmata. They would remain visible for the rest of his life because of his earlier work treating lepers. Some believe that the wounds were actually symptoms of leprosy. And as Francis approached his death, many predicted that he was a saint in the making. When his health began to decline more rapidly, Francis went home. Knights were sent from Assisi to guard him and to make sure that no one from neighboring towns could carry him off. That time the body of a saint was viewed at the time as extremely valuable relic that would bring among many glory to the town where it rested. So Francis finally died on October 3rd, 1226, at the age of 44 in Assisi, Italy. Today's Francis has a lasting resonance with millions of followers across the globe. He was canonized as saint just 2 years after his death on July 16, 1228, by his former protector, Pope Gregory IX. Today, St. Francis of Assisi is the patron saint for ecologists, title honoring his boundless love for animals and nature.